It's so good to be here. I was here with you last week, and it's exciting to be back so quickly. I am so incredibly excited to introduce to you one of our speakers from the Possibility Gap. So, last week I told you a little bit about a salon that we were doing. I was with my partner, Wendy Brookhouse, who is co presenting the Bridging the Possibility Gap salon with me. And we told you that we were going to come back and tell you a little bit about some of the speakers. So today, I'm excited to introduce to you our first speaker, Maggie Greyson. Maggie is the chief futurist and CEO of Futures Present, which is an internationally recognized and award-winning futurist and designer who helps organizations imagine the future to make better decisions today. And I mean, isn't that what we all want in terms of our businesses and in terms of our lives? And Maggie actually has an inside track on that because she has been doing this work for some time. Maggie, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. And we've had some fantastic conversations over many years. And this is a beautiful opportunity to another, meeting of the minds conversation. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in the conversations we've had more recently, and I think this is why I wanted you, and I was so excited that you were able to join us for our salon, is that the work that I've been doing recently around hope and purpose and gratitude and looking at these as levers for our businesses, as I look at the work you're doing, a lot of what you do focuses in on purpose. And what I would love to hear from you and maybe help us to frame it for our listeners is why is purpose important? Now, I know it's often termed things like vision or sometimes even mission. I like to call it purpose because I think that it is more grounding and I think it's more descriptive. But I'd love to hear from you what your thoughts on that are and why it's important in businesses and even in our lives.
yeah, well, I think that's probably a question that everybody's asking at some point is like, what is my purpose? Why am I here? What do I want to do when I grow up? And these are all questions that we can choose how we ask ourselves what these questions are. What is my company here for? Why is my company only looking 6 months out when we have a vision of social change, or we have a vision of growth or something like that that can't be done in 6 months, but might take 5 years of outlook and so on. So one of the things about purpose and I guess vision is that you've got something that's sort of a North Star. We've used that term before. And one of the things that with the North Star, there's a lot of noise around it.
Mhm.
So we're in a particular time where there's a lot of, to say call it clutter is a generous term about the media. But in terms of our lives and pressures on our businesses and, how we relate to the government infrastructure and all of those things, there's a lot of change happening. And when you can compress that, and I say compress because I'm thinking of the Tide Pod that you put in the washing machine, right? Like
Mhm.
it actually is something that can guide you through these tumultuous
Turbulent
times
times. Yeah.
and center your business and center the people who are working in the business and partnering with you and transacting with you.
One of the things that really stands out for me as, yes, of course, it helps us to kind of have that alignment and centering. But I think, if I think about the organizations I've worked with and for over the past few years, many of them have had these brand big visions or missions or purpose or whatever you want to call it. And then maybe they had it pasted up on a wall, or maybe it was in a document that, as I was, on board it, they told us what it was, and it pretty quickly became wallpaper. It pretty quickly became something that, we all kind of knew in the background, but it didn't really guide our actions. And I know the work that you do, you use this in a way that maybe is different from the way that most see it. Maybe you can help us to understand how we can avoid that problem of like these things we put out there that we call purpose or vision becoming just, lip service to employees or to stakeholders or to shareholders. And in fact, really all we're doing is sort of getting through today to tomorrow.
Yeah, it's a really good question because it really gets to the heart of what I do in my practice, which is to help people imagine a vivid and compelling future and vision manifested in that space, or purpose manifested in that space. So on one
What do you mean
side,
by vivid? Help us to understand just what that you mean by a vivid description.
yeah. Well, I'll go back just a little bit. I have a decade of working in the theater as a designer. And what we would start with on a script is, here's an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper with some, black text on it. And then we would spend a lot of time with a lot of different creators bringing this to life, and then in front of an audience. So we would try to understand the world around this one piece of paper, and it's similar to maybe the vision on the wall, which is just words, but we would dig into the meaning behind it, and how does this character express themselves in through this text, or how does a prop, for example, become meaningful? So if I give you a piece of stick, and say this is a sword, to translate that impact of the stick going from a prop in a basket to a sword that could be the one that you know topples the empire. There's a lot of meaning making and building that
Mhm.
goes behind it. And so the work that I do, and help people to do is, or enable people to do, is to see that what's going on today that might be signals of what the future might be like.
Mm, mm.
So,
So it's like it's really, I mean, so if I were to take what you've just said and put it in my words, it sounds to me like what you're saying is creating a vision that uses our senses, that we can see and we can taste and we can smell and we can hear, that the vividness of it makes it so real for us that we are in a moment of like I can imagine what my life would be like in that new world. Like we're imagining these new worlds. And we live in a world where we have technology that helps us to do this, and we can have these immersive environments. And if what we're doing is using that idea of immersive into something that doesn't exist, but something that we want,
mhm.
that changes how we interact with it. Do I get that right?
Definitely, definitely, in terms of how it changes how we interact with it. So we sort of tend to, this is coming from the research, we tend to think of the future as blurry, and unknowable,
Mhm.
and that it's menacing. However, if we study what is happening right now, that might turn into the future or futures, as I like to say, um, we can start to deflate that unknowingness about it.
Mm.
So using the senses is a tremendously grounding um, reality for us, no matter what environment we're in, whether it's digital or whether it's face to face. And when you engage touch, taste, feel, smell, and so on, uh, you are making your brain is making sense of
Mm.
what it is that you're engaging with. So if and when we work together, creating an environment where the future has some realities that we're very certain about, gravity, the sun coming up at the roughly the same time, 50 years from now. Um, you know, these kind of things start to root us, even though change is happening really quickly. And so
Right.
there's an inner knowing that tap that uh, we I use and help people to use as a designer to understand what they know, but maybe hasn't been voiced yet.
Right.
So that when they
And
look to the future, it's blurry. It's not they're not totally alone.
well, again, when I hear you, so a couple of things that you've said there is like, okay, the future is blurry, and I think we can all associate to that because it's like, I don't know. I look out. I mean, tomorrow, I don't know. What am I going to be doing tomorrow? Maybe I have a schedule and a plan, but is it gonna play out in the way that I think it is? And maybe tomorrow's a little more certain, but next week maybe less certain. Next month, probably less certain. Next year, I don't know. And so we're living in this world where as you said, there are multiple futures. We've got multiple experiences of these futures. And yet, you said something I thought was interesting is, but when we tune into what's being shown to us now, we can start to get a sense of what's coming, what the future is actually sort of serving up to us, I guess, in the best possible way. And so what with that, I started to think about as you were saying that, like, we tell ourselves, I mean, I'm a storyteller, and I love story. And I love story for a couple of different reasons. One is that, first of all, we're just hardwired for them. And so we lean in, and stories are great. But actually, equally as important, and I've learned this in the work that I do, is that story, and if we think of vision and purpose, they're really just stories we're telling ourselves. Um, they help us to create what we want. Like, you know, one of the things that I started really leaning into deeply over the past few years was understanding how we got to where we are by telling stories from if I go back in time to stories. And I started realizing that, if we look back 70 years, 80 years, and look at what were the stories we were telling ourselves in the 1950s and the 1960s. Well, this was the rise of pop media, and we were telling ourselves stories of a dystopian future and of, aliens taking over the earth and of humans being, in some way, living in dictatorships and whatnot. And it's interesting that some of what we're living today mirrors some of what we were saying then. And I wonder, if some of the stories we were telling ourselves in those days have come manifest because we believed them, so we created them. And I
Mhm.
wonder if that, first of all, how does that land for you? And secondly, if it does land in the way that I'm suggesting it does, how do we use that to create a future?
That I love that observation. You brought that up a few weeks ago when we were talking, and it just really lands for me in the way that if we look at the music, the sci-fi, the movies that we were creating, they tended to be dystopian. We still create dystopian stories, but we have a choice because positive stories about the future can also be motivating. So
Mhm.
if there's a negative story about the future, we go towards it. If there's a positive story about the future, we go towards it because the simplicity and the clarity of that story has so much power. So we can actually, through looking at what's going on today in terms of look at this innovation or look how that group has made decisions, or there's a network here that has figured out what the little lever is in order for innovation to flourish and bring up the entire pie in an economic sense. So
Mhm.
the point is not lost about we move into the stories that we create, and the saying, or I guess the idea about art imitating life and life imitating art, those stories are tremendously powerful. They're, you know, you said yeah yesterday, which I loved, which is like artists are the greatest futurists
Mhm.
because they are creating futures with the work that they're doing.
Yeah.
So what I think is when you talk about in a year from now, you don't know what's going to happen, you know, da, 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 like, yeah, we don't know what's going to happen if we open up the domain that large. But if we actually frame the question around what is going to happen, what might happen in this domain, then we can start to um, build build a story that we want
Right.
into that.
And we can start watching for, like, what are the signs that it's actually working. I think this is, a powerful thing that both you and I talk about a lot, which is what are those weak signals? Futurists are always looking for weak signals. And, for people who maybe aren't in the realm of futurism, maybe you can explain what is a weak signal and why is it important?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a funny term by itself because weak implies, not powerful, and signal is the idea of something being transient. So if we think of a weak signal, it might be something like, uh, the building across the street went up for lease and was rented immediately. Maybe there's something interesting about that particular turnaround for that building, and what is it in the market, perhaps. That's on a really micro scale. On a huge scale, a weak signal might be there was a policy in Europe about AI that has been in Parliament. It went in and then it went out and it wasn't passed. So it could be weak because it's hard to hear, and it could be a signal because it comes and it goes, it pings and then it goes back. However, when you start to get a practice of looking for weak signals that are in the sphere of your interest, then you can start to build a trend in your mind of what might be happening with a bit more assurity. So instead of validating, uh, yes, everybody's going to be wearing, you know, uh, frills next year, and then you just see it everywhere. It's the other way around, and wondering, you know, what's something unusual
Mhm.
that's happening that I'm seeing multiplications and patterns of.
Yeah, so I'm just going to say that back to you. So, these weak signals are things that we notice, like you said, the building across the street leasing immediately, or the bill in Parliament that moves through. But then maybe we see another, or we hear about, randomly another building that leased very quickly, or another AI bill that seemed to go through, and we're like, oh, that's odd. I just heard about that yesterday, or I just noticed that, and now I'm hearing about it again. And sometimes these things come and you go, oh, whatever, and then you don't pay attention to it. But I think what you're saying is, look, those are what we call those weak signals. They're weak because, well, first of all, no one's really tracking how quickly, in this case, they probably are, but let's just, for sake of argument, no one's tracking how quickly buildings are leased. And yet, that could be, like, certainly not, maybe economists aren't, but yet the building leasing could be a weak signal for a shift in the economy, or a bill that's going through quickly could be a shift in sentiment within a governmental system. And so if we look at it not for what it is, but for what it represents on a larger scale. And we start to track. So maybe it's not that we just see lots of buildings leasing, but maybe we see a building leasing. And then maybe 2 weeks later, we notice that, that all of our favorite food is sold out of the grocery store, and you know that the grocery store gets stocked up on Monday, and it's Monday and it's gone. And you go, oh, that's interesting. Well, isn't that kind of like the building leasing quickly? They're not the same and they're not correlated, but yet there could be a weak signal in there. And so this is where if we start to track some of these, it helps us to make that future, I think, a little less blurry. Am I getting that right?
It does. It does. Uh, One of the things that I think is so important in when you're thinking about the future is playing with the question of what if.
Mm,
And instead of starting with the close-ended assumption that the economy this or that competitor that or the next generation, that it's set in stone, just put that to the side for a second, because if the stories that we tell ourselves, we have a choice in whether they're positive or negative. Again, put that to the side, do the work before you create the story. So what if all of the fruits and vegetables were gone in the grocery store? Okay, what if, until you sort of play in a landscape where what if they were all gone because that grocery store chain is actually um, has been doing something under the radar, and the government said, you know what, not you. Like,
no
we're gonna
food for you.
no food for you. We're gonna flip who we support in our government policies.
Mm,
Um, and so that what if part is a choice that we all can uh, make, looking in all sorts of directions without the menacing, without the negative, without the blurry.
mm. I love so what you're saying is like, so when we live in the what if, it allows us to, maybe it's that the government is changing policy and they don't like that grocery store. Or maybe that grocery store, maybe we had an entire an entire population of fruit eaters move into the neighborhood, and they just got sold out. Or maybe it's that the trucking that normally brings the fruits to us has gotten waylaid and they're not able to get it anymore. Or maybe, and you could keep doing that, or maybe thousands of times. And the question I think you're giving to us is, what serves us best? Right? Is it like, because if what we're doing is building a story of a future, well, what's the story? Like, if we get to choose because we're storytelling,
Mm.
wouldn't we tell the story we want and not the story that is scary and maybe taking us into different places?
Well, we tend to not go
What?
for the
Yeah.
positive stories, and there's a lot of reasons why we do that biologically,
Yeah, of course.
social science, outside stories that are, if it bleeds, it leads. Like, there's a lot of reasons why negative stories come first. And talk to Brene Brown; she knows why too. Um, and what when you have this sort of plethora of stories that you could tell, it actually becomes a decisive moment where you can say, so what? So, for my business, for my relationship with my the people that I transact with, right? What does this mean for me and for them? You get to choose that
Mm,
story of what the so what is. And the purpose part helps you to guide what now.
mm,
So when your purpose and your vision and your story about something desirable, the what now can be either a run for shelter, or it can be build up the resources that get you towards that positive. So
mm.
uh, we have a choice and a practice that we can think through when we're methodical about whether it's our there's I can't remember the name of the thinker who talks about system one and system two thinking.
Oh, Danny, Daniel, Kahneman.
Yes, yes. So that's I knew you would know the name. That's one of the things that the practice of thinking about the future in a methodical, evidence-based way does for us, which
Mm,
is, oh no, the grocery store, you know, didn't have
it's out of
my
fruits and vegetables.
right. Or the system two is, slowing down. Okay, so what? And then applying that to the purpose.
And it sounds to me like there's almost a little bit of a framework going on here, which is, watch for these weak signals, these things that seem to show up and give us little hints or indicators that maybe there's something to watch. And then as we do that, get curious, ask the what if. What if? Oh, that's really interesting. I wonder what that could mean. I wonder. And what if it was this and what if it was that? And then as we get, all of these different things, some of them negative, some of them positive, then we go into the so what. Well, why is that important? Like what, as we start to land in places from the what if, we go, well, why is that important? How would that impact me? How would that impact my family? How would that impact my business? How would that impact my country? And we could go on and on with that. And then once we've got that, so what? Then we go, well, now what? Now what do I do about that? Or how do I react? Or how do I show up differently? Or what do I build or create? And so this is sort of this beautiful little sort of continuum that allows us to build stories that are
Hmm.
grounded in what could be.
Hmm.
And I still, 'cause the optimist in me is like, well, why would I want to create a dystopian future? Why wouldn't I want to create something that's more hopeful? And I hear you because I know that our, that lizard brain that we have that's trying to keep us alive all the time, that's there, it's our brain stem that is constantly giving us indicators of threat, wants to go to that scary place because it keeps us alive. It
Hmm.
tells us that, look, as I like to say, the dinosaurs around the corner, so don't go around the corner, so we stay in our place. But the problem with that is we never learn that there's this big, beautiful world out there that we get to explore. And so we can choose to listen to that, that ancient part of ourselves is trying to keep us alive, or we can grow up a little bit and decide that maybe it's safe enough for us to build a future that maybe looks a little different than the present we have.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's in this storying process that's low risk.
Mm,
It's just conversation or paper or analysis. It's not betting the entire bank
that's it.
on a story that you have not fully thought through in a robust and frameworked way. So I think there's a lot of ways to get into positive futures. Um,
Maggie, I could talk to you all day, but I know we're almost out of time. And so I want to, just before we go, first of all, invite everybody to join us at our upcoming salon, Bridging the Possibility Gap, where Maggie is going to be joining us, picking up from what we just talked about and telling us more about it. We're doing that in the frame of conversations and specifically around the idea of purpose, hope, and gratitude, and how these three things come together to create um, a business framework, I like to say, that will build not only our businesses, but the people who work within them and, the communities within which we contribute. And so if you are in the Toronto area or plan to be on June 18th, grab your ticket now. We only have 100 spots and they are going quickly. We just launched last week and we're already selling very, very quickly. So join us at the Bridging the Possibility Gap Salon. The link is on the screen. You should be able to click it or just simply type it into your browser. Grab your ticket, and I can't wait to see you there. And Maggie, thank you. This has been absolutely fascinating and riveting, and I love our conversations.
Me too. Can't wait to continue them. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, Maggie. We'll talk soon.
Okay, bye.